If you like our video, click the button to subscribe to our channel and get easy access to new content. To see our full suite of ad-free video courses, instruction manuals, and quick reference guides, visit us at www.teachucomp.com. Path components you create in paths in Photoshop and the path components of selected shape layers in the Layers panel in Photoshop all appear within the Paths panel in Photoshop. If you draw a path component in Photoshop without first selecting a path in the Paths panel, then the path is added to a temporary path called the work path. Alternatively, if you select a path in the Paths panel in Photoshop and then draw a path component, the path component is added to the currently selected path in the Paths panel. The Paths panel in Photoshop lets you manage the paths in a Photoshop document. To show the Paths panel in Photoshop, select Window, Paths from the menu bar. The Paths panel in Photoshop shows the various paths in the file in a list. Each path in the list shows a path content thumbnail of its path components to its left, followed by the path name. To show or hide the Path panel's options menu if needed, click the Paths Panel menu button in its upper right corner. At the bottom of the Paths panel in Photoshop is a toolbar that contains buttons that let you create, manage, and delete paths in Photoshop. The names of the buttons in this toolbar, from left to right, are Fill Path with Foreground Color, Stroke Path with Brush, Load Path as a Selection, Make Work Path from Selection, Add Layer Mask, Create New Path, and Delete Current Path. To create a new blank path in Photoshop in the Paths panel, click the Create New Path button at the bottom of the Paths panel. Paths are given default names like Path 1, Path 2, and so on. New paths always appear at the bottom of the list of paths in the Paths panel, regardless of which path is currently selected, but always appear above the Work Path temporary path. To convert the work path into a normal path in Photoshop, click and drag the work path from the Paths list and drop it onto the Create New Path button at the bottom of the Paths panel. Doing this then creates a new path from the content of the work path and removes the work path from the Paths panel. To immediately delete a path in Photoshop without a confirmation prompt, click and drag the path to delete from the Paths list and drop it onto the Delete Current Path button at the bottom of the Paths panel. Alternatively, to delete a path in Photoshop and show a confirmation prompt, click to select the path to delete in the Paths panel. Then click the Delete Current Path button at the bottom of the Paths panel to show a deletion confirmation prompt window. To confirm deleting the path, click the Yes button in this prompt. To cancel the path deletion, click the No button instead. To apply a layer mask to a selected raster layer in the Layers panel, if the raster layer has no layer mask, click the Add Layer Mask button at the bottom of the Paths panel. To apply a vector mask for a selected path in the Paths panel to a selected raster layer in the Layers panel that has a layer mask, then click the same button again, which is now the Add Vector Mask button. Doing this then applies a vector mask to the layer containing the path components from the selected path. To make a work path from the active selection in Photoshop, click the Make Work Path from Selection button at the bottom of the Paths panel. You can then convert the temporary work path into a normal path to keep it if needed, as previously mentioned earlier in this lesson. Conversely, to load a path as a selection in Photoshop, click to select the path in the Paths panel that contains the path components to load as a selection in the Photoshop document. Then click the Load Path as a Selection button at the bottom of the Paths panel. To stroke a selected path in the Paths panel within a selected raster layer in the Layers panel by using the current brush tool settings in Photoshop. First, set the desired stroke options to apply for the brush tool in Photoshop, and set the desired foreground color to apply. Then select the layer within which to stroke the path in the Layers panel. Then select the path in the Paths panel to stroke within the selected layer. Then click the Stroke Path with Brush button at the bottom of the Paths panel. To fill a selected path in the Paths panel within a selected raster layer in the Layers panel using the current foreground color, first set the foreground color to apply. Then select the layer within which to fill the path in the Layers panel. Then select the path in the Paths panel to fill within the selected layer. Then click the Fill Path with Foreground Color button at the bottom of the Paths panel. Remember to click the subscribe button to see more of our videos. See our full suite of courses, instruction manuals, and quick reference guides at www.teachucomp.com.